Hi, welcome to the first ever Pocket Pulp Live. My name is Eric Bryan Moore, the host and narrator of Pocket Pulp. What is Pocket Pulp? If you don't know, Pocket Pulp is a fiction podcast that features new stories every week, from fantastical to out of this world to downright weird, from a variety of different writers. You can find it everywhere podcasts are found, on Spotify, Apple, Google, YouTube, Facebook, and on our website, pocketpulp.podbean.com. And if you're a writer and you would like to have your story featured on Pocket Pulp, shoot us an email at pocketpulpsubmission@gmail.com. All right. Tonight, I am excited to have our first guest, Matty Dalrymple, whose story, All Deaths Endure, was featured on the podcast last week. Matty is the author of about 13 fiction books, the Lizzie Ballard thrillers, the Anne Kinnear suspense novels and shorts, and she also has a couple of nonfiction books, including The Short Tack, which we're going to be talking about later because it's all about how to make money with short fiction, and I think that's really interesting. And she also has a blog and a podcast called The Indie Author that explores the craft of writing as well as publishing. So she's a busy lady. So let's welcome her on, Miss Matty Dalrymple.
Hey.
That's the
we're even
audience.
getting applause. Excellent. Oh. Hey, Eric, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Matty. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
I have some notes here. I'm just going to move them over to cover my face. That way I don't have to see my facial expressions. So, Matty, where are you located?
I'm outside of Philadelphia.
Okay. And you use that for your writing, yeah?
I do. My first book in each of my series, the Anne Kinnear suspense novels and the Lizzie Ballard thrillers, are set largely around the Philadelphia area, Philadelphia, Chester County, which is actually where I live, the Main Line, other areas. So, yeah, I like to tap into the local landmarks and sometimes name them and sometimes just change the name a little bit to protect the author from angry readers. But I think it's usually clear what the setting is, even when I change the name.
Great. Well, you got a lot going on. You write a lot, fiction and nonfiction. You have a blog and a podcast, and you have your own imprint. What exactly is an imprint publishing? That's just for novels, for paperbacks and hardbacks?
Well, an imprint is a publishing company, and so I've used William Kingsfield Publishers as the imprint that I publish all my books under, the fiction and the nonfiction, the novels and the shorts. So it's sort of the umbrella entity under which I do my writing and publishing work.
And I read on it that William Kingsfield was not your dad's name, but your dad's pen name?
Right. Yeah. He started out, my dad was a writer. He was the person who inspired me to pursue writing. And he started out in short stories, and he was actually pretty successful back in the 50s. He had some stories published in Collier's and Cosmopolitan, and he wrote under the name William Kingsfield. So when I wrote my first book as sort of an homage to my father, I named the imprint after his pen name.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And your first book was The Sense of Death?
Yes, that's right.
And that brings us to Anne Kinnear.
Yes.
Who is Anne Kinnear?
So Anne Kinnear is a woman who can sense spirits. She has a business that's run by her brother where she contracts with people for engagements. I try to treat it in a very sort of business-like way. And she, in The Sense of Death, she has a very basic ability to sense sort of the demeanor of spirits. Are they friendly? Are they unfriendly? Is a place haunted? And a client might be considering, like she has a client who is determined to live in a house that has a spirit in it. And so she has a series of engagements with this woman to try to locate a house with a friendly spirit in it. But through the course of the book, and then even more through the course of the series, her ability expands to the point where she can actually communicate with spirits and not just sense them.
Okay. And I saw that you have 10 Anne Kinnear books out.
I have, there are 4 Anne Kinnear novels. So
Uh-huh.
The Sense of Death, The Sense of Reckoning, The Falcon and the Owl, and A Furnace for Your Foe. And then I have, I think currently 5 Anne Kinnear suspense shorts that are available on all the retail platforms to purchase as standalone ebooks. And then the one there, Our Dancing Days, the one on the second row there to the left, is a short story I've retained, and I share that with people who subscribe to my email newsletter. That's my reader magnet for people to sign up for my newsletter.
Great. And you originally, I saw in another interview, I think you were talking with Mark Leslie Lefebvre,
Yeah.
and you were saying that you had this idea for a story that wouldn't work for Anne. And so that's when you came up with Lizzie Ballard, and you started to write one book and then turned into 2, and then it turned into 3, but you kept promising readers, I promise there's going to be more Anne Kinnear.
Right.
But you didn't have time, so you wrote your first short story. Is that how it went?
Yeah, exactly. I exactly as you said. I had this idea. All my stories have to do with what happens when an extraordinary ability transforms an ordinary life. Oops. Go ahead. Uh-oh, we may be,
Oh, no, sorry.
may be
I think it
contending
froze on
with
my end a little bit.
Brazilian internet, right? So all the stories have to do with what happens when an extraordinary ability transforms an ordinary life. And I had this idea for an extraordinary ability that I wanted to explore in a story, but it didn't really fit into Anne's world. So just as you said, I started working on what I thought was going to be one book, which was Rock, Paper, Scissors. That's the first book in the Lizzie Ballard thriller trilogy, and was promising my readers that I'd be back to Anne as soon as I was done with that. And then it turned into a trilogy. And so I didn't want to totally lose touch with the Anne fans or have them, sort of lose interest in the series. And so I wrote the first Anne Kinnear suspense short, which was called Close These Eyes. All my Anne Kinnear novels and all but one of the shorts have a title that's based on a Shakespeare quote. So I had gotten the idea for Close These Eyes because I was visiting Maine, which is the other place that many of my stories are set. So they're either set in Philadelphia, my kind of home base, or Mount Desert Island, Maine, which is where Bar Harbor and Acadia National Park are, or 2 of the Lizzie Ballard books have a setting in Sedona, Arizona. So I was in Maine doing book research in January, and I was having dinner in Southwest Harbor in a restaurant that, now I can't remember what the name became in the story, but it's Sips. It's on Clark Point Road in Southwest Harbor, and it was, as you can imagine, very dark and very cold after I finished dinner. And so I walked down Clark Point Road toward the Claremont Hotel, which is at the end of on the water at the end of Clark Point Road, and it's a beautiful old hotel. Actually, where my husband and I went for our honeymoon, and but not open in January. So I walked down there. You walk by the town docks, and then I turned off. You walk by a little graveyard to get to the Claremont. And I walked around the Claremont, and it was super fun but super creepy being out there on my own. And just that environment gave me the idea for Close These Eyes, which is Anne Kinnear finds herself eating dinner at the fictional equivalent of Sips, and ends up walking down the road to the town docks, and nefarious goings on ensue.
Nice. And so that brings us to All Deaths Endure, which we got to do on the podcast last week.
Yeah.
Where did this story come from?
Well, I can't remember exactly the genesis of it, but the general idea is that Anne, has this business where she's loaning out her ability to sense spirits and in these professional engagements. And I started thinking, what happens when she is hired by someone and she doesn't encounter a spirit? And in certain circumstances, she could just say, well, I'm sorry, but, there isn't anything or anyone here for me to communicate with. But in the cases of All Deaths Endure, there's other things going on. So the woman who has hired her needs to speak to her departed husband in a way that's pretty important. And so Anne has this kind of moral dilemma about what do you do when this person is desperate to speak to someone who has passed on and you can't make contact. So that was sort of the thinking behind what became All Deaths Endure.
You sent me a few stories, and All Deaths Endure was the first one I read, and immediately I was just drawn to it because it's really I don't know how to describe it. It's a dark, kind of haunted story. There's these lives just haunted by this person that's departed, and it just drew me. Everybody's like missing something, and I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, well, I loved your performance of it. It was so much fun. It's always fun. I have audiobooks of my novels, and it's always fun to hear how someone performs them, how somebody else, brings their take to it. But I couldn't have been happier when I heard what you had done with the story. It was really great.
Thank you. One of the things I had to ask myself was, I don't know if it's a cheat, but in acting, one of the things we always think of is why do these people desperately need each other? Mm-hmm. And so I had to think of why does the butler desperately need this job? Why does he stay to help? And one of the things I kept coming back to was, why does Anne Kinnear need to come back every year? She doesn't take money. And I could say, as an acting choice, I could go with, oh, she's a nice person, but that doesn't kind of give it the. And so I had a reason for myself, and I was just wondering, what do you think, what in your mind is Anne's reason for continuing to come back?
Yeah, well, I'm going to give what could be spoilers, but I think that somebody can listen to your performance or read the book, and I don't think this will spoil the experience for them. But basically, Anne shows up, and it's this old woman and her butler living in an old sort of rundown mansion on Philadelphia's main line. So the Tony neighborhoods running west from Philadelphia mainly along Route 30. It's the main line. And so Anne shows up, and this old woman has asked her to come on Valentine's Day because that is also her wedding anniversary, and she wants to talk to her deceased husband. And so the woman isn't acknowledging Anne at all. She's just trying to have a conversation with this empty chair in the dining room, and Anne is kind of trying to, figure out what's going on and intercede. And I just thought it is sort of it was kind of a gut-wrenching thing to write, because the woman is so lonely for her spouse, so lonely for her husband, and she's dealing with this difficult situation with her son and doesn't quite know what to do. And I just think that, especially when I was writing that story, it was earlier in the Anne series, and Anne was still at a point where she was uncomfortable about her ability, based in part on difficult situations that had put her in the past, and also the fact that some people believed her, but some people thought she was crazy or a liar. And so she was kind of forcing herself to do these engagements, but realizing that it was doing someone some good. In The Sense of Death, the first novel, when she's a teenager, she actually helps find the body of a missing young person. And so it's a kind of a terrible thing for her to have to do, but she also recognizes that it's an important thing. Now she's in this situation where she can do something important for this woman, but it's not at all related to her sensing ability because her husband isn't there. And so she eventually ends up kind of pretending that she's channeling a conversation from the husband, when in fact it's just her guessing what the woman needs to hear, and then being prompted by the butler, the longtime butler of the elderly woman, who is it's kind of like the two of them. The two of them were the last two standing and trying to look out for each other. And yet this woman is still desperate for her husband to be there to help her. So I just thought it was an interesting dilemma for Anne. And I do think that it was her recognition that she was the only person who could give this woman any sense of relief from her stress or from her desire to speak with her husband, even if, as she says to the butler, I don't get paid to pretend, but the pretending was the best she felt she could do for that woman at that time.
There was this one moment where the older lady, she gets angry and she slams her cane down on it. It was just such a powerful moment, and of like, it was Anne's first time there, and the confusion and the butler kind of stepping in. That moment was really it was a heavy moment for me to narrate, but it was also that's the fun stuff to do.
Well, and I thought you did. I always think, I didn't think of this when I was writing it because it was pre having my books narrated, but there's a line in there that's something like, no, she said, her, more like a cry than a word. And I thought you did that brilliantly. Like it would be very easy to go wrong with that, but you did a lovely job on that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it was you wrote it easily for me to do. It was so visual. It was so easy to see, and so there was such a sadness and loneliness about just the whole thing that it was really fun to dive into.
Good.
You talked about. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying that I saw Leo put up a note. I'm just looking over at the comments. Do you want me to comment on this note from Marla? I haven't read it yet.
Yeah.
I got the impression because she said he'd always been there and would never leave her, and she wanted to see if he was truly still with her, or wanting to know he was. And Anne didn't realize what she was getting into at first, but she was very compassionate and couldn't say no if that's what it took to give someone else peace. Yes, I think that's exactly right. Anne didn't know what she was getting into to begin with, and by the time she realized, she was so deep into it, she couldn't really extract herself. And there is that line in the story about the husband was always home with his wife on Valentine's Day, which was their anniversary. And even now, the wife wants to make sure that even after his death, he's still there with her.
I had to, because as an actor, I can't say she's a nice person. It doesn't translate for me in my mind. It just doesn't translate. Maybe because I'm not a nice person. I don't know. But like, it's not actable. So I went with, maybe Anne is afraid of being alone. Like, maybe she has this power and it terrifies her that maybe she's going to grow old and alone, and so she comes back because it's her greatest fear is to grow old alone. So I went with that in my head as her reason to come. Not that we needed a reason, but that in my head, I had that kind of in the back there.
That's very cool. I'm so pleased that somebody thought through that with that level of care and consideration.
Yeah, it's fun. I want to change gears a little bit about the craft of writing, because you have a philosophy that involves boats.
Yes.
Is that right?
It is. Yes. I've never found anything about the writing craft or the publishing voyage, as I like to say, that can't be accommodated in a nice nautical metaphor. And so one of the ways that I apply that concept is that, well, to back up a little more, many, many years ago, I was at a writers group, and it was mainly traditionally published writers or traditionally, wannabe writers in this group. Okay. And they were talking about this woman who was self-published. I don't like to say self-published because it sounds like you're doing it all yourself, which I don't think is true. I prefer independently published, but I was one of the only independently published people there, and somebody else was talking about another independently, well, I'm going to say self-published author. And they said, well, how can, if you're doing this all yourself, then how can you tell when the story is done? If you don't have an editor at a publishing house telling you when it's, good enough to go.
Yeah.
And they said that this person had said that when their story was 60% good, that they published it. And I said, well, that's just awful because you wouldn't send somebody, to sea in a boat that had 60% of its planks in place. You're sending people on a voyage and you kind of owe it to them to have it be watertight when you send them off on the journey. And the more I thought about that, a couple of years after that, my husband and I were in Maine and we were at a charity event. And one of the items that they were auctioning was this beautiful hand-built dory. And I thought it was practical. It was well made. It was clearly watertight. It was beautiful, very straightforward. There wasn't like a lot of embellishment on it. It was just a beautiful small boat. And I thought that is really like the model that I want to use for my writing. I think of it as a craft. I don't think of it as like high art that I'm waiting for the muse to strike for. It's a craft, and that's what I'm going for. Something that's sort of practical and beautiful and well put together and watertight. And so, yeah, I could just spin out the nautical metaphors almost endlessly. But there's always a good way that you can tie in a nautical metaphor to address anything in writing or publishing.
Do you?
There we go.
Spend time with
You broke up a little bit.
Did you actually sell? Sorry. Do you actually sell? Do you spend time on books or just use that for writing?
I haven't had an opportunity to sail for many years, but there was a time when I was sailing pretty frequently, and also had an opportunity for a couple of years to spend some time on motorboats. So, yeah, I hope to get back to that sometime. But I'm kind of looking back at past experiences to tap into that.
Nice. I've always been obsessed with sailing, and I watch sailing videos. Anyway, back into it though. You actually, so when you get a story idea, how do you take that idea and then turn it into a boat? What is your first step?
Well, it has evolved over time. So when I wrote The Sense of Death, I was still working in, a day job in the corporate world. And I was writing on the evenings and the weekends, among other things that I was doing. It took me 2.5 years to write that book because I actually had a scene in my mind that took place right in the middle of the book. So at the time, I was spending a lot of time in San Francisco, and I pictured it at the time as happening in San Francisco. And what I pictured is Anne shows up at this house, and I pictured it as one of those beautiful Victorian homes in San Francisco. And she's been hired to do an engagement there. She's supposed to go through the house and see if there's any ghosts there. And she gets there, but she can't go in because she gets this horrible feeling from the house. And the reader knows, but Anne does not know that that a murder took place in the house. And so I tried many ways to write up to that scene and to write, from that scene to a satisfying conclusion. And that took me 2.5 years, which was fine because it was, I was kind of doing it as a hobby. But now in 2019, I left my corporate job and I'm doing writing and publishing and podcasting full time. And I really needed to find a more efficient way to get a story done. So usually I have a general idea of what, there's something that triggers the idea. So the last book was, actually, I'm going to skip back to the third one. The Falcon and the Owl is a story that has an aviation background. I'm not a pilot myself. My husband is a pilot, but I took flying lessons for quite a while. And I actually owned a small plane myself for a period of time. I don't take lessons anymore and I don't own the plane anymore, but I'm just fascinated with aviation. And so I wanted to write a story that involved a plane crash. And so I had this kind of the setting or the theme that I wanted to use for it. And I'm trying to be much more diligent about getting the story outlined very thoroughly first. So a finalized novel of mine might be between 80 and 90,000 words. And so I would put together an outline that was maybe 10,000 words. So it wasn't really an outline, but it wasn't a fully fleshed out story either. And that has been great because it has helped me work through so many details that with my first book, I worked through by writing all the chapters and then realizing they were wrong and having to trash them and start over again. But with The Falcon and the Owl, what I found was I wrote this outline. I sent it to my editor. I said, can you just give me some sense of if you think this is going in the right direction? And he got back to me and said, well, I think that you have to make the bad guy worse throughout the book because it comes as kind of a surprise at the end when you find out who the bad guy was. And so I pondered that. And I finally said, you know what? I don't think the bad guy is the bad guy. I think I picked the wrong bad guy because I'm not feeling that this person is worse than I've already portrayed them. And so thank heavens I discovered that before I'd written 80,000 words. Right. I could easily change it when I had 10,000. And so, I'm trying to, so a good nautical metaphor is I'm trying to create that, like the model, how shipbuilders will create the small model of the large boat. I'm kind of trying to do that and working out all the ways that it might not be watertight before, before I've committed myself to building the entire large vessel.
So does your outline just include like ideas for scenes and and this I want this to happen, or do you have like, okay, chapter 1 this is going to happen, chapter 2 this is going to happen, or is it more loose than that?
Well, I sort of go back and forth. So I'll start out writing person A and person B are person A is working in the hangar. This is actually true in the book. And person B shows up and accuses person A of having had an affair with his wife. A fight ensues and one of the people dies. And the other person decides they're going to dispose of the body by flying it to a remote location, getting rid of it. So that's like chapter 1.
Okay.
That would end up being like sort of the 5,000 word outline. And I would go through that and do that for all the chapters. And then I would go back, I would kind of like keep sweeping through and adding more and more flesh around that. That's not really a good nautical analogy, but fleshing it out. Yeah. And the other thing I found that has made my writing a lot more efficient is I don't spend any time on any details that don't matter for the plot. So I don't say, Fred, a tall, dark-haired man who is wearing a Flyers sweatshirt and dirty jeans. Like, no, I can do that later on. So I just say, okay, Fred shows up, describe Fred. And so it's only in the later stages when I know there's going to be a guy named Fred and I know he's going to be dressed, he's like a sweatshirt and jeans kind of guy. And then I can go in and fill those things in because it's just another way for me to avoid putting a lot of time into something that might end up getting trashed in the end. And then the other thing I do, because I used to be a project manager and I'm very obsessive compulsive, is that at some point I start having trouble keeping all the moving parts in my mind at once, because normally I have 2 storylines going. I have kind of the main storyline, like in The Falcon and the Owl, the main storyline was about this plane crash and what happened. And then there's a secondary storyline about a documentary producer trying to talk Anne into doing a documentary with him about her spirit sensing ability. And that kind of evolved because I realized that I wanted there to be a conflict between Anne and Gwen, the one of her antagonists in the story. Gwen is an aerobatic and air racing pilot, and they have vastly different attitudes about celebrity. So Gwen is saying to Anne, you kind of owe it to your fans to give them a good show. And Anne says, I'm not a performer. I'm a professional. I don't give shows. I have consulting engagements. And so that's an ongoing battle between them. Anne notices that Gwen's nickname is the Falcon, the Peregrine Falcon, hence the Falcon and the Owl. And all her plane, her everything, her clothing is all in Peregrine Falcon colors, kind of blues and grays and a little touch of yellow. And as opposed to Anne, who appears that all her clothes are sourced from LL Bean. And so there's another thing like, why would I, we're hiking out into the woods. Why would I care what I'm wearing? But Gwen is all brand right all the time. So I have the two storylines going. And then the stories depend very much on who knows what when. And so to avoid a situation where I act like somebody doesn't know some fact that they should or does know some fact that they couldn't, what I do is I put together a spreadsheet. Here's my project management background coming out. And I have all the characters across the top and all the chapters down the side. And then in each cell, I can say, what does that person do, know, and think at that point? So in chapter 1, Anne doesn't have any idea that anything's going on at the hangar, but Guy A is angry that his wife is having an affair, and Guy B is, feels bad because he had an affair with her or whatever. And so that way I can look across a row and see everything that's happening at that point in the story. And I can look down a column and see everything that happens to that character through the evolution of the story. So that has also saved me a lot of time in terms of, going down a path that is wrong or is not helpful.
Oh, very cool. I think J.K. Rowling did a similar thing for the Harry Potter books. At least I saw like a scribbling once.
Oh, interesting.
And I had read the books and I looked at it and I was like, I don't know what that is. But it was a kind of a similar thing. It was like she tracked all the characters and the reveals and that kind of stuff. That fascinates me.
Yeah, that is fascinating. It would be great if anyone would ever share that, if she would share what that looked like, because that would be. You
can find it online somewhere. There's images of it. Like she took a picture of it once.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Yeah, because that's a very complicated story to keep track of. I always wonder how far in advance, like, did she really know what the entire arc of the, I don't know, what is it, 7, 8 books, however many books there are. I wonder if she really knew what the whole arc was going to be, or if she was surprised by any of it.
Yeah, just kind of pieced it together. I don't know. I know when they were before they ever started filming the first movie, the actor that played Snape. I can't remember his name. He's incredible. Rickman. Yes, Alan Rickman.
Yeah, I love Alan Rickman.
He said he didn't know if he wanted to do it, but he had to have a conversation with J.K. Rowling first. And she told him a secret about the character that nobody knew, just the two of them knew. And so she must have known something at least about that.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, is that is? That's it. Yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah, that is
cool. And kudos to Leo for finding it and pulling it off.
Yeah, right.
Too.
Thanks, Leo.
That is really
Leo,
neat.
The producer.
Yay.
So
I also just noticed, I'm going to answer the question from Marla, are these other books in audio? And yes, all the novels are in audio, except for the most recent one, A Furnace for Your Foe, which will be coming out later this year.
And how did you go? Did you go through ACX to do that?
I did for the first ones. So ACX, for people who don't know, is kind of like the matchmaker under Amazon between narrators and authors. And so for the first books in both the series, I actually have, for the first 3 of each, I had different narrators. And you can go on there and you can say, I want a female who sounds like she's in her 30s with a non-distinct American accent and a narrator who specializes in straightforward presentation and can do accents. And then they give you all the people who, have that resume, and you exchange demo tapes and so on. I'm sure you
Yeah, I've
know,
done it
but
a lot on the narrator side. I've never done
yeah.
it on the writer side though. How many auditions do you get for like that first book? How many auditions did you get?
Um, I think I ended up getting either just by people seeing it or soliciting probably 12 auditions.
Okay.
And so I had some of those, some people just submitted an audition when they saw the book go up, and then some people I had found the people that I liked, and I went to them and I said, "Would you consider um, auditioning for this?" And so the narrator for the first three Ann Kinnear novels is Sarah Purdom. And then the narrator for the three Lizzie Ballard books is Victoria Matlock, and they're both just great. And I've been so lucky to have gotten such both talented and also super easy to work with people. So that was really fun. And like I had said earlier, you could really learn things about your writing by listening to someone else perform it.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that for the first book, like I try to be, and I'd be interested to hear your comment about this, but I try to be good about they're a profession, a creative professional too. You have to let them, have their perspective on it. But it was very interesting because with A Sense of Death, there was one scene between this guy and his father, and the narrator read it as if the father was being mean to the son, so you would leave that chapter feeling bad for the son, whereas I had written it imagining that the father was frustrated with the badly behaving son. And I waffled on that for a little bit, and I finally said it's like not going to be quite right if the reader leaves that chapter feeling more sorry for the son than they do for the frustrated dad. And she very graciously re-recorded that chapter, but it's such a education, because then I could go back and read that chapter again and say, what did I write that made her come forward with that performance?
Yeah. It is an interesting dynamic, yeah, the relationship between an author and a narrator, because you've had this story in your imagination, in your heart, in your psyche for however long, and then you have to give it to somebody else, and they have to make it their own.
Exactly.
You gotta cross your fingers and hope it kind of lines up.
Yeah, and it was even interesting during the auditions. So in the Lizzie Ballard thrillers, the first story, Rock Paper Scissors, starts out when Lizzie, the protagonist, is very young, and so there's maybe like a quarter of the book where she's young, and for most of the book she's time skips forward, now she's 16, 17 years old. But there are these couple of chapters with Lizzie as a very young girl. And I got an audition that I loved the narrator, but as soon as she started doing Lizzie as like a 6-year-old, she started talking like this. And I said, I wanted her so much. And I said, that, like, okay, maybe that sounds like a 6-year-old, but no one's going to listen to that for more than like 7 seconds before they're going to return the audiobook, because it's just so annoying to listen to. Yeah. And we went back a couple of times, and I kept telling her, like, don't do it that way. Like, maybe, and you can probably weigh in on this, but not like make it squeaky, but make it lighter or something like that. Like, have you had to narrate children's voices? And
they come up a lot. For me, my voice doesn't really lend itself to a child's voice, so I have to just play the innocence of a child.
Yeah, exactly.
I find that gets me where I need to be most of the time.
Yep.
And sometimes it happens. Sometimes the author wants something, and you just can't figure it out. I went back and forth with a writer once, and he ended up going with somebody else, and I never figured out what I was doing that he didn't want. So it happens sometimes.
Yeah. I like Marla's comment here. I think when you trust the narrator to do it justice, it works out very well. And when you have those few moments, the relationship you build with them makes it work so well. Yeah. Yeah, I think that when you can be respectful of each other's perspective that you're each bringing, that's
Yeah, as long
what
as
lays the good sound.
as long as you get a narrator that is a professional, they
Right,
treat your work as you would treat it, as a baby, as your baby, as their
right.
baby, if that
And
metaphor works.
I think that the other things that authors can do to make it easier is I've now learned that if I go through, and it's hard sometimes to find these words yourself, but Paoli, for example, Paoli is a town outside
Okay, yeah.
Philadelphia, and it didn't occur to me to write that in my little audio book narration notation for the narrator, and she said Paoli, and so that I had to say, like, no, you have to fix that. But I guess, if they're good at the audio engineering part of it, they just can clip out that one little word and put the new one in. So fortunately, I don't think it's
Yeah,
too
the
much.
software now makes it really easy. You
Yeah.
just re-record the sentence and pop it right in.
Yep.
I can't imagine how it was, 15 years ago, but now with all the software, it's super easy.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I have to say, kudos to my Lizzie Ballard narrator, is that one of the books had a bunch of Swedish people in it.
Oh,
So I was working on it, and I knew she was going to narrate it. And I said, "How do you feel about a Swedish accent?" And she was like, "I'm game." And there are actually just a couple of little snippets of dialogue in Swedish when the bad guys are talking to each other. And my nephew has spent a lot of time in Sweden, and so I sent him. First of all, I sent him the. I basically said what I wanted to say in English, and then I put it through Google Translate, and I sent him what
okay.
it was, and I said, "Can you tell me if this makes any sense?" And in some cases, he was like, "Yeah, that's fine." And then in some cases, he would say, "Well, the words are right, but the tone is not right." And so he was able to
Mm.
fix it to what, a Swedish person would actually say. And then he also recorded the Swedish dialogue so that I could then send it to my narrator and she could kind of mimic what he was doing. But
Oh, that's very cool. That's
yeah,
very
God bless
considerate.
the narrators.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Foreign dialogue is always like it brings the production to a halt. Like, oh my God, how do I say this?
Well, what I can't imagine is the difficulty of having identifiable voices for all the different characters. Like, I basically have, when I'm reading my own stories for like readings or Facebook lives or whatever, I basically have three voices. I have like my voice, which is Anne's voice, and then I have like the gruff guy voice, and then I have the warbly old woman voice. And that's it. Like, if there's another short that also has an older woman in it, and it would be indistinguishable from the character that you read in All Deaths Endure. But how do you keep track of multiple characters' voices over the course of a
Um,
story?
I open another file on my computer and I just copy and paste whatever I did for that voice, and that way I have that file throughout the production. I'm like, who was this guy again? Oh yeah, and I go back and like, oh, okay, that's what I did, and I just kind of I'm trying to learn to tone down the vocal stuff that I do, but
Huh, that's interesting.
yeah, because I'm trying to be more with the intention of the character and less vocal work. But with the vocal work, you can do like you play. Is he nasally? Is he talk from the throat? Is it gravelly? And then you can move your mouth in a different ways. Maybe they talk out of the side of their mouth. Maybe they're really pronounced. And so there's things you play around with that, and then you kind of like
Yeah.
you move your body language while you get that character kind of, and that kind of helps make funny faces. All of that, all that helps. And the good thing is usually there's not a camera in here, and so I can just get silly. So that all helps.
Yeah, that's the whole idea of the body posture, I think, is very interesting.
But got to be careful because I tend to hit the mic. That's a
Oh,
no-no.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, also you can't be like jumping around while you're.
Yeah. So
You have a
you
note that says
also
no
have
camera for now.
a podcast and a blog called The Indie Author.
I do. Yep.
And and this, of course, must have come about because you're an indie author. And so what is the indie author?
So most of my um, content from the indie author right now is my podcast. I have a weekly podcast, and I have guests on. As I said, we talk about the writing craft and the publishing voyage. So it's a combination of craft and indie author business topics. We just had one. You can see some of the titles up there. There was just one that I was super excited about, Perspectives on Writer's Block. And I had sent out a request to all the people who had previously been guests on the podcast and asked them to send me a couple of minutes of their perspective on writer's block. And I got about eight submittals, 8 or 9 submittals, including Robert Dugoni. If anybody knows Robert Dugoni, he had been on an earlier episode talking about backstory and flashbacks, and he had sent one in. Just some great input, everything from like very tactical, here's a task you can perform to try to get you past writer's block, to really very open and vulnerable admissions from people about their own struggle with writer's block, and really thoughtful perspectives on why we experience it and why we shouldn't feel bad about it. So there are a couple of those perspectives on episodes, but mainly it's me and a guest talking about whatever their specialty is. Mark Lefebvre has been on a couple of times, our mutual friend, Mark Lefebvre.
Yeah, and I wanted to, luckily, Mark is the one that introduced us, kind of, and I was on his podcast and introduced the Pocket Pulp to you, and then luckily we got your story on. So thank you, Mark.
Yeah, exactly.
And you and Mark actually wrote a book together.
We did.
Short Tack.
Yep. It's called Taking the Short Tack, Creating Income and Connecting with Readers Using Short Fiction. And so it's all about the idea of the short tack is a sailing maneuver that you can use, for example, to maneuver in tight quarters, or you can use it if your engine goes out. There's all sorts of ways we were able to tie in the idea of using the short tack to the benefits you can get from using short fiction to break through writer's block, or to reach out to readers, or to build your community of fellow authors through an anthology and things like that. So that's one of my nonfiction books. And then my other nonfiction book is The Indie Author's Guide to Podcasting for Authors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in how to make money with short fiction. The reason I started this podcast is because I love short fiction. Yeah, I remember picking up an old magazine of weird tales as a child, and all the way through like some of Stephen King's short stories. I've always been a fan of short fiction, and there really is no audio market for short fiction. And I thought this could be a fun thing.
Yeah, I think that there will be. And, one of the things that you had very graciously done is provided me with the audio file of your performance. And so, I can easily imagine putting that up on a platform and charging, I charge 99 cents for my shorts as standalone ebooks. You charge, I don't know, $2.99 for the audio. And I think that audio is really one of the big sort of emerging ways you can take advantage of short fiction. And Pocket Pulp podcast is exactly the kind of thing that's paving the way for that, that people are going to find your podcast and listen to that, and it's going to whet their appetite for short fiction. And even some of these sort of like radio dramas that are now put out in podcast form, I just think that audio is a huge untapped opportunity for using short fiction to find people, to attract them to your work, or to make money through sales or sponsorships, or all the other ways that you can make money through reaching people through audio.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I know that you were saying that you were, when you were having the conversation with Mark about the Pocket Pulp podcast, I think you had some ideas about eventually monetizing it. Is that right?
Yeah, if it goes well, maybe get some advertisers on here. If it goes really well, like dream come true. Well, I could imagine turning it into its own app, audio publishing platform. But let me get to 100 listeners first.
It's nice to have that
But yeah, I
goal,
love
even
the
though if it's
idea
a
of
stretch, it's
I
cool
love
to
the
have
idea
that
of a
idea.
short fiction because I think well, I love the idea of sometimes these audiobooks are massive. You get like a 40-hour audiobook and a 12-hour audiobook, and sometimes you just need like a palate cleanser. Like, well, I want to listen to something short while I'm cooking dinner. And I
Yep.
thought there was a market for that. And so I'm hoping this is it.
Yeah, I absolutely think there is, and kudos to you for paving the way for that with your podcast.
Thank you. So, Matty, if people want to learn more about you or read your books or listen to your audiobooks, how can people find you and your work?
The best place to go for my fiction work is mattydalrymple.com. And the best place to go for my nonfiction work is theindieauthor.com. And it's indie, as you can say, it's indie with a Y, INDY, theindieauthor.com. And you'll be able to get to more information about my books and the podcast there.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, Matty. I think I took enough of your time, but thank you.
This was so much
And
fun.
I had a great time too.
Yeah,
Let me send a quick
congratulations
thank
on your
you
first
to
live.
thank you. I made it. I'm only
Yay.
sweating a little bit. And thank you to Leo Rodriguez, the producer. And if anybody's out there watching, please submit your stories to pocketpulpsubmission@gmail.com. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And yeah, that's good.
So
Thank
much
you so
fun.
much,
Thank you
Matty.
so much, Eric. Thank you.